Alright, let's sell this. Peaky Blinders, you've seen it, right? If you haven't, what are you even doing with your life? If you have, you probably think Tommy Shelby is the ultimate bad guy. But here's the thing, real life? Way scarier. The real Peaky Blinders weren't just brooding anti-heroes, they were ruthless. And trust me, by the end of this, you'll be glad they're not running your neighborhood. So, let's time travel back to the late 1800s in Birmingham, England. The streets were filthy, the air was thick with smoke, and gangs ran everything. And at the top of the food chain? The Peaky Blinders. They weren't just another group of thugs, they controlled the streets, ruled with fear, and made sure everyone knew their name. It wasn't just crime, it was domination. Let's talk about that name. Sounds cool, right? But it wasn't just for show. They sewed razor blades into their hats, so if you messed with them, they'd literally blind you. Imagine getting into an argument and realizing their hat isn't just an accessory, it's a weapon. Scared yet? You should be. Here's the twist, these guys didn't look like your typical gangsters. Nope, they dressed like they owned the place. Tailored suits, polished boots, pocket watches. If intimidation was an art, they were Picasso. But don't let the fancy threads fool you, underneath all that, they were stone-cold killers. Birmingham back then wasn't the kind of place you'd want to take a stroll at night. The streets were crawling with gangs, and the Peaky Blinders were the kings of the jungle. They didn't just own the streets, they were the streets. And if you didn't pay up or follow their rules, well, let's just say you wouldn't be around to complain. Now, here's a plot twist, there was no Tommy Shelby. Sorry, folks, but the real Peaky Blinders were led by Billy Kimber. He wasn't suave or strategic like Tommy, he was a straight-up bruiser. Kimber didn't plan grand schemes, he crushed his enemies with brute force. Less chess game, more bar fight. Ever wonder how they funded their empire? Easy, illegal betting, robbery, extortion, and smuggling. Basically, if it involved money, the Peaky Blinders had their hands in it. Imagine living in a city where even placing a bet could cost you more than just your paycheck, your life could be on the line. Okay, about those razor blades. They might not have been as common as the stories say, razor blades were expensive back then. But the idea alone was enough to scare people. It's like they weaponized fear itself. You didn't need to see the blade to know it could be there, ready to strike. The Peaky Blinders didn't just control Birmingham, they terrorized it. People didn't just respect them, they feared them. Their name alone was enough to make shopkeepers pay protection money and witnesses suddenly forget what they saw. It wasn't just power, it was psychological warfare. Behind every gangster empire is a network of women keeping it all together. The Peaky Blinders were no exception. These women weren't just in the background, they handled money, carried messages, and even managed operations. And if you thought the men were scary, wait until you crossed one of them. The cops? Oh, they tried. But the Peaky Blinders were always one step ahead. They had informants everywhere, secret hideouts, and escape routes that made them impossible to pin down. Imagine being a police officer knowing that every move you make is being watched, and not by your friends. The Peaky Blinders didn't just have to deal with the law, they had to deal with other gangs. And trust me, these weren't friendly rivalries. When they clashed with gangs like the Birmingham Boys, it wasn't just a scuffle, it was a bloodbath. Think street wars with fists, knives, and whatever else they could get their hands on. Betting might sound harmless, but in the hands of the Peaky Blinders, it was a weapon. They controlled the racecourses, and if you didn't pay your fees, you wish you'd never placed a bet in the first place. They didn't just run the game, they owned it. These guys weren't just criminals, they were strategists. They knew how to expand their empire, strike deals, and use fear to get what they wanted. It wasn't just about violence, it was about control. Every penny in Birmingham had to go through them first. Like all empires, the Peaky Blinders' reign eventually came to an end. By the 1920s, newer, stronger gangs like the Sabini gang pushed them out. But make no mistake, their fall wasn't peaceful. They went down swinging, leaving behind a trail of chaos. Let's be real, the show Peaky Blinders makes them look way cooler than they actually were. Tommy Shelby's calculated moves? Not so much. The real Peaky Blinders were messy, violent, and not exactly thinkers. But hey, Who doesn't love a little creative license? The Peaky Blinders are iconic because they weren't just criminals, they were legends. Their style, their tactics, their name, it all adds up to a story that's too good to forget. And let's be honest, sharp suits and sharper razors? That's a vibe. Here's something you didn't see in the show: tattoos. The real Peaky Blinders marked themselves with symbols of loyalty and power. It was like a permanent badge saying, "I'm one of them, and you better not mess with me." They didn't just recruit adults, they brought in kids, too. These young recruits learned the trade, did the dirty work, and grew up in the gang. It was like a never-ending cycle of crime, passed down like a family business. When the Peaky Blinders walked into a room, the atmosphere changed. People stopped talking, eyes shifted, and the tension was palpable. They didn't just command attention, they demanded it. When these guys fought, it wasn't just a bar brawl, it was carnage. They used belts, boots, and anything else they could swing. A fight with the Peaky Blinders wasn't just dangerous, it was life-threatening. The newspapers loved the Peaky Blinders. Every crime, every fight, every scheme, they wrote it all down. The media didn't just report their story, they built their legend. The Peaky Blinders didn't just stick to Birmingham. They made deals with Italian gangs, traded contraband, and sometimes fought over territory. It was like the early days of international business, just with a lot more blood. The suits weren't just for show, they were a message. Every time they walked into a room, they wanted people to know they weren't just thugs. They were professionals, and they meant business. The Peaky Blinders weren't just about intimidation, they were brutal. They didn't just hurt people, they made examples out of them. Every act of violence sent a message: don't mess with us. Over time, the Peaky Blinders became more myth than men. The razor blades, the fights, the control, some of it might be exaggerated, but that's what makes the story so gripping. The truth? Even scarier than the legend. Thanks to Peaky Blinders, the gang is more famous now than ever. But remember, the real Peaky Blinders weren't stylish anti-heroes, they were terrifying criminals. The show just makes it look cooler. Even decades after the gang disappeared, their names still sent shivers down spines. Families in Birmingham would warn their kids, "Don't cross that street at night, that's Peaky Blinders territory." The gang might have been gone, but the fear? That stuck around like a ghost that refused to leave. The Peaky Blinders lived by one rule: loyalty above everything. You turned on them, and that was it, game over. No warnings, no second chances. Imagine knowing that one wrong word, one wrong move, could end your life. It wasn't loyalty by choice, it was loyalty out of sheer survival. Joining the Peaky Blinders wasn't like signing up for a football team. There were tests, rituals, and plenty of blood. They didn't just want soldiers, they wanted people who were willing to do whatever it took. Imagine proving your worth by taking down a rival or stealing from the wrong crowd, knowing failure wasn't an option. The Peaky Blinders loved the night. It was their time to roam, strike deals, and take out their enemies. People would lock their doors, blow out their candles, and pray they wouldn't hear that ominous knock. If you heard them coming, it was already too late. Birmingham wasn't big enough for all the gangs trying to claim it. The Peaky Blinders didn't just have rivals, they had enemies. And when two gangs clashed, it wasn't just a fight, it was a battlefield. Streets would run red, and innocent bystanders often got caught in the crossfire. The streets were their playground, but also their battleground. Young boys with no families or futures were scooped up by the Peaky Blinders and turned into little soldiers. These kids grew up fast, trading innocence for survival. By the time they hit their teens, they'd seen more blood than most soldiers at war. Even the Peaky Blinders couldn't trust their own. They had informants, double-crossers, and rats, people feeding information to the police or rival gangs. But here's the kicker: the punishment for betrayal wasn't just death. They made sure you suffered first, so everyone knew the price of treachery. The Peaky Blinders were more than just a gang, they were a symbol of fear, power, and chaos. Their story isn't just about the crimes they committed, it's about the mark they left on history. They ruled Birmingham with iron fists and razor-sharp caps, and even now, their legend refuses to fade. So, next time you hear someone say, "Peaky Blinders," just remember, they were real, they were ruthless, and they were nothing like the TV show. Hit subscribe if you want more stories that'll keep you up at night.